What is your name, your title, and what inspired you to run for office?
Mike McAuley, and I'm a building designer. I'm the owner of McAuley Design Works. And why am I running for mayor? When I left the Port Commission 5 years ago, I really wanted to make an impact in my community, and I was originally looking at a legislative seat. And after doing some soul searching, I realized that me being a part of a legislative body was not really where my heart was. I wanted to have a bigger impact on my community rather than just go to Olympia and argue for my community. So I looked at running for mayor 4 years ago, and I just started my design company, and it was a bad time to do both. So I set it aside, and I'm back now to do those things that I want to do, and making an impact where I live is really the most important thing, so that's why I decided to do it.
What are you most proud of in your career?
Oh, I've got a long list. I used to race bicycles. I was a nationally ranked mountain bike racer, and I loved doing that. I quit doing that in my mid-30s. I was a Marine. I have been a self-starter my whole life. I was thinking about this recently. I haven't really had any sort of career-style jobs in my life because I've always been a self-employed person and chasing new dreams. So when I left the Port Commission and I started my design company, I wasn't a designer. I'm self-taught, and I spent a couple of years learning how to do it as I went, and it was a big challenge and a lot of stress, but I love my work. I love what I do. So, I'd say that at this point in my life, probably I'm most proud of being able to do that, I didn't really leap off a cliff, but I took a big risk right there. I was supported by my wife, which was fantastic, but I'd say right now that's probably the most thing I'm proud of, work-wise.
The County Council has decided that the jail should be located in Ferndale. Do you agree? If yes, how will you get this project passed?
I disagree with the location and I disagree with the program, but it's the county's program, right? So the best thing that the Mayor of Bellingham can do is advocate for what we need, and there's going to be a vote on it. So I would advocate for what I think is the appropriate thing to do. It's not what's being proposed. But if that's what actually gets built, then that's what gets built, and the city of Bellingham has to deal with it, right? So what I would like to see as far as the jail goes, and I've had a lot of conversations with lawyers and the police about this, if we look at who really needs to be incarcerated, what kind of incarceration does that look like? So the jail sentences are 364 days or less. So these are people who are barely even gone for whatever crimes they've committed, and they're coming right back. They're not in prison. So if these are not our violent criminals, they're the ones that need the most connectivity to the services and the help that's going to help them come back out in a few months and reintegrate and maybe hopefully stop doing the bad behaviors. I have some intimate details in my own family around that kind of thing. I've got a brother that's gone through this cycle his entire life, so I've been watching it for the last 30 plus years. So I know what happens when you go to the jail. The system that we're using right now, it's just put people in a box, and then in 8 months they come back right on their streets. And there's nothing that's happened in between except they sat there for 8 months. So I don't approve of what the county's proposing. I think that we need more minimum security. We need more, like books, for example, in the jail, more services in the jail, more ways for people to have hope that when they get out, they're not just right back where they were before. So my proposal would be something different than what the county's proposing, but they're doing it, and we'll take what we get and hope for the best.
There are a lot of different tools to tackle homelessness, but we don't have endless funding. What do you think is the most effective tool deserving county support? What is your top priority for tackling homelessness?
So the number one thing we can do on the right now for the homeless problem, right? Because we have people that are unhoused, and in our last count we're around 1,000. Okay, so getting 1,000 people into a house at the current rate of about 400,000 per unit. Do the math. We don't have any money for that. Plus, we have wait lists. So a lot of those folks would qualify for housing if we had that public housing built. So what we need to do in the meantime is not do nothing, which is what we've been doing. So I want to buy interim emergency micro homes. So that's what you see in the tiny home villages that we have right now. I call them micro homes because tiny homes are a little bit different. And in the last 4 years, we've only put up 75 of those. So we're woefully behind on providing that service for our community. But that's the most immediate and lowest cost thing we can do. So the very first thing I want to do is buy at least 50 of those. I've got a spot picked out. It's on public land, so we don't have to, we don't have to fight with the neighbors or try to, use eminent domain to get some land from somebody. We have a little space for 50 right now. We can do that. We should have done that, a long time ago, but that's the very first thing I want to do. And then work on getting the property that we need for more of those. And that's the immediate solution. The units that are available locally, they're very available. They're $12,000 each, so they're not free, but that's the lowest cost housing that we can find anywhere without using donated materials and donated labor, which is also a thing that we should work on. But relying on that free money, relying on donated materials, relying on donated labor, that's risky, right? So because we've been doing that, we're short on providing that immediate housing need. So we get people out of their tents and into these microhomes. If you're in a car or an RV that you can't give up for whatever reason, that's great, but I want to create a safe parking lot for those folks. There's been some reticence about how to do that in the state of Washington, but King County just did it. So I know that the legal problems have probably been worked out. And I would say, if it was illegal or there's a problem, that we create a solution here locally, and if it's not technically legal because it's not allowed, then I say we develop a good idea in our community, we deploy that good idea in our community, and we let the Attorney General decide if they want to sue us or not. So we have to solve this problem, and those are two ways we can solve it. So that we stabilize these people, right? And then as the wait lists are opened up, so then we can move those people into more permanent housing through the sort of more traditional methods. We run out of money really, really fast with our funding from the legislature and from Congress. So doing nothing isn't a solution. The microhomes are, and the safe parking lot is.
Bellingham has a continued burden of growth that's outstripping our ability to maintain and increase capacity to meet demand. What will you do to ensure that our aging streets and utility systems will be able to meet the needs of the future?
Infrastructure. Infrastructure is hard because it doesn't pay for itself. It's always there's this in planning. There's greenfield and built out. So greenfields are where you haven't developed yet, right? So they typically pay for themselves because you've got new investment right there. But then 50 years down the road when you need a new sewer pipe, well, they're not generating any new taxes, right? So how do you pay for that? Every city in the history of the world has had this exact same problem. And it's really just ensuring that we're taxing the entire population at an appropriate level and that we're prioritizing those things that we've identified are going to fail or are failing. And those always rise to the top of the list. We don't have a lot of greenfield left, right? So all of our infill is going to be, most of our infill is going to be within the city limits with a little bit into growth management areas, right? And we literally just have to allocate the funds that we have appropriately, and that's really the only answer for that because there is no new funding. I will say though, we have a wastewater treatment plant that's got some problems. And before the Reagan administration came in, this is a long time ago for a lot of people, right? But the federal government used to fund things like wastewater treatment plants. And then the Reagan administration came in and their new budgets and Congress stopped doing that. So you see things like the Superfund stop being funded, wastewater treatment plants around the country stop being funded, but we need to get back to that, right? The Salish Sea is a national asset. In the world of things, it stands out as a pretty amazing place. And I know it's going into our water. It's why I don't eat anything that's grown in the Salish Sea, because I know what's in the water. If we believe that the Salish Sea is that important to us as a nation, then Olympia and Congress have to step up and help us keep our water clean. And I think that's one of the most important things we can do right now. We can't tax ourselves enough to pay for what's needed there, right? But I think that if Congress knows how important it is to the rest of the nation, that they can help us pay for a new system there.
Downtown businesses have struggled through the pandemic and the growing impacts of our unhoused community. How will you support our downtown businesses?
So that one's actually pretty easy for me because, as a port commissioner for 8 years, that's pretty much all ports do is support, local economies. Finding a place for the unhoused people to go is really one of the first solutions that you can tackle, and it should have been tackled, and we can tackle it right away. There was a decision out of Idaho that I think scared a few people about, sort of sweeping folks off the street, right? And the court said you can't just kick people out of public spaces unless there's some place for them to go. And with the microhome villages that I'm proposing, we'll have a place for them to go, right? So we can get people off the streets. Part of the new jail, I wish they would stop calling it the jail, but part of the new jail proposal is diversion services, right? So some of that's not services for incarcerated people, but just services, period, for people who are struggling. There's supposed to be new funding for that, so we can connect those people as much as possible. There's a term that's called functional zero, and you'll see people running for office, they'll say it all the time, right? We're going to take care of this problem. You're not going to take care of everything, right? You're going to have an outlier in there somewhere. So we do what's called functional zero, where we work our butts off to get every single person, recognizing that we're really just not going to. There's always going to be some kind of an outlier. And every city around the world has this exact same problem, right? So we're not unique here either. It's just how we're solving the problem is locally for us is probably what makes us a little bit different, because we can develop our own systems and our own programs, right? So we do that first, okay? We make sure that the community knows that the downtown is sort of a unique and interesting place. And one of the ways I want to do that is to continue what they're doing, but bring that sort of into the rest of the neighborhoods. It's called placemaking. The Downtown Bellingham Partnership is pretty good at it. So they're doing like the concerts on the streets and some murals and things like that kind of thing, supporting what they do there, especially through the partnership, but also borrowing that sort of activity, the placemaking activities, and bringing it out into the rest of the neighborhoods and the rest of the community. The downtown does struggle, but the city, or has struggled, but the city is pretty big, and it's much, much bigger than the very small, roughly 1 square mile of the downtown. So we need to take that kind of activity and spread it across the city. So there's that kind of positivity everywhere.
We've seen a growing emphasis on bike and pedestrian improvements in places around town, as well as an increase in car-pedestrian accidents in other spots. Do you see Bellingham as a safe community to walk in? Do you think the new bike measures are working?
I would say that the city of Bellingham is just as safe to walk in as any other city, right? All the pedestrian standards they're mandated federally. The sidewalks, the way the curb cuts work, all that kind of stuff. The right-hand turn problem is a problem in any city that you go to. So there's been some new effort on adjusting how the crosswalks work and how they're timed and that sort of thing, so that the right-hand turn problem is reduced. When it comes to the bicycles, okay, so this was near and dear to my heart. I have long felt that the bicycle pedestrian conversation at the same time is an inappropriate conversation. Bicycles are very different than pedestrians. I used to race bicycles. I've ridden on and trained on every street in this county. I'd spend 20 plus hours a week just training on the road. So I've seen probably everything you can see that would happen on a roadway. And we need to take the pedestrian conversation and keep doing what we're doing with that. But the bicycle conversation has to expand. When we look at arterials, they go where people want to go in their cars, right? But we also know that that's where people want to go, period. So we try to get a bus line in there, and we try to get bike routes in there, and then suddenly we're cramming everybody into the same place, and all of the intersections create conflict, and that's where we have the accidents, right? Where people trying to cross those arterials, that's where we have the accidents. My proposal would be to take what's called a bicycle boulevard, and we have one of those in the city on Illinois, and just blow that up into a micro-mobility corridors. So if you take an arterial and you go 1 block over in almost any part of our city, you've got a neighborhood street that's roughly empty most of the day, right? So you take that and you do partial closures. They're very, very cheap to do, because if you go look at what's on Illinois, you can see exactly how it's done. It's a very, very cost-effective way to take bicycles and other micro-mobility users. So those are the electric skateboards, the electric scooters, all of those other things that when they're crammed into the arterials create more conflict. We take them off of that road so that the cars aren't fighting for space, the people that need parking aren't fighting for parking, and the people that are on, they're just out there in their skin, not surrounded by a car, are going to feel safe. The reason I want to do that is because we need mode shift, and mode shift isn't just creating a facility like a bike lane and saying, here's your bike lane, now go use it. It's creating a psychological change so that the behavior of people changes. If I told you that Alabama was a safe route to school and you had a 5-year-old, would you tell your kid to walk down Alabama? It's a perfectly safe street. It's got a hot crossing. There's nothing wrong with that. But psychologically, you struggle with that. So if we go a block over where there's no traffic, then we use those for our micro-mobility corridors. We can do that throughout almost all the city until we get to the north. And then I'm proposing that we put a tunnel under I-5 just east of Meridian to connect the neighborhoods through there, and then do some pedestrian and micro-mobile ADA accessible bridges over Meridian so we connect the neighborhoods side to side as well, because that's growing out there. So I think for me, that's how we reduce those conflicts and we get more people out of their cars and into those things like electric bicycles and that sort of thing.
Bellingham continues to try to embrace its role as a diverse community. What does that mean to you? And as mayor, how will you ensure that everyone feels welcome in our city?
Ooh, that's a tough one. You know, if people move someplace that they don't see themselves in the community when they walk down the road, it's hard. I've traveled around the world, and I know that some places my white skin stood out and I was different. You know, people looked at me and I felt uncomfortable. I think what's most important there is that we do the things at the city level that we've been doing, right? We tell people that we're inclusive, and we work at those bits and pieces that prove that we're walking our talk, right? So I think we're doing pretty good there, just as a municipal kind of a government activity. The hardest part, though, I think, is when it comes down to, well, for example, housing, right? So when we've got housing that favors a certain part of our economy and not another part of our economy, then it's harder for people that are more working class, that more diverse kind of diaspora of the population overall. It's harder for them to gain a foothold here, right? So we have generational wealth that looks like me that continues forward, and then people that don't look like me just never really get a foothold here. So I think that probably our housing policy is going to be one of the most effective ways to improve diversity across the city. So we have housing, the workforce, affordable housing for folks that don't maybe look like me and but want to live here like the rest of us. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things that we can do moving forward.
Would you like to share a closing statement?
So, you know, a lot of people ask me why I'm doing this, right? And I think that as a voter, when I look at who's running for an office, I have to sort of, you know, and I think we all should do this. We should look very carefully at why the person is doing it. And you can see the voter statement and the voter's guide, and maybe, you know, give them a call, go to some sort of an event where they're speaking, but really dig into not just their motivation for doing it, but do they have the qualifications for doing it. So people, I think, in this community know me. I was a port commissioner for 8 years. I've been doing civic, you know, work and volunteering here for over 20. But for me, you know, when I look at the 5 of us who are running for this position, I truly believe that I've got the best resume for the job, as well as all the other background that you would need for the job. So I understand politics, I understand what it's like to work in government, you know, I understand what it's like to work in government as a leader, but then also, you know, I have the right education and I have the right civic engagement background. So I think that of all the other 4 candidates, I just feel like I'm a much better fit, and I hope the voters, you know, take a look at that and think that that's important and support me. So that's it. That's what I got. And vote Mike.